We're here with Mendeltje van Keulen, Professor of Applied Sciences at the Hague University of Applied Sciences, on the changing role of Europe. And we're doing an interview today about the European Union, national interest, and how negotiation could be improved on that level. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks.
First question, obviously, this little booklet of being wrong connected. Why were you so interested in the European Union, and why this little booklet?
Well, Hans, yeah, great to be here, and it's very nice to talk about a topic that fascinates me already now for more than 25 years, which is indeed the connection with Brussels from a professional point of view, so companies, ministries, but also for students, future professionals. How can you make the connection with the European Union negotiations? How does that work? When I became a professor, I did my inaugural lecture here at the university, and then I had the opportunity to make that into a little book, which is, I said I want to write a very small book on the European Union because there are already quite voluminous books on the European Union, many pages on its history and decision-making and institutions, and I think personally to write another book on that already quite a big pile is a bit boring. So I would like to make a very concrete guide for someone going to Brussels for the very first time and then say, okay, what do I need to know? What do I need to know? And for needing to know the link with the institutions and decision making, I made a very small guide, so to say.
And in it you make very interesting observations about this disconnection, at least in the Netherlands, between the municipalities, the provincial political interests and the national political interests, how each party, each interest group is trying to influence Brussels, but doesn't really communicate between the municipality, the national, and then the Brussels. So they communicate not with each other, but besides each other, so to speak.
Yeah.
How would this influence negotiations?
Well, it's really funny because now we can go to Brussels again after the pandemic, and if you walk around at I would say the epicenter of Brussels EU decision making, it's the Schuman, the Rond-Point Schuman, where the institutions are, the Council, the Commission building, and then you have Place Lux where the European Parliament is. If you walk around there, you hear Dutch. It could be either Flemish, of course, because the Belgians speak Dutch, but you can also have many Dutch people walking around there doing their thing. They're just going to Brussels to do their daily professional routine. And what is that? Negotiation, you would say. But it can be someone either from the municipality of Sliedrecht, where you meet someone from Groningen, or you meet someone from Zuid-Holland, the province, but it could also be a ministry. And all these people walking around there very often don't know from each other that they walk around there doing their thing, their professional thing. And they could even talk to the same Commission officials, so someone from the European Commission, on the same day, either representing Sliedrecht or the Ministry of Justice. And for that person in the Commission, it's a Dutchman coming towards her or him. And for us, it's like, no, it's Sliedrecht, it's not Dutch, it's Sliedrecht, or it's the Ministry, or it could even be the city of Amsterdam, which is also represented in Brussels on its own. So you see so many professional offices there from different stakeholders that if I would be an academic professor, I would now go on the topic of multi-level governance, because that's, of course, theory that encompasses everything going on there. But for a student, multi-level governance, you have to know about it, but you also have to see it. And what you see there is this, in this example, Sliedrecht and the province of Utrecht and the city of Amsterdam all walking around in Brussels, going on the same train, which is why the train is on the forefront of my book.
And what is why would a ministry and a municipality and a provincial house, why would they even be in Brussels? I mean, we have the Dutch government, they take care of our business when it comes to the European Union, I assume. So what are these smaller groups doing there?
Yeah, it's bypassing, as we call it in theory. They go to the central government, they go to the ministries. If you are a local government, you go there, you do your business there. But actually, sometimes there's so many policy dossiers in which there's controversy, also within the Netherlands, and within Finland, and within France, that you see that local authorities, like municipalities and provinces, go to Brussels themselves. They go alone to Brussels, and they found their offices there. And they say, well, thank you very much, national government, thank you very much, Prime Minister and Minister, good for sending the Dutch message, but we actually from Sliedrecht or Heerlen or Hague, we have another message, which is a bit more nuanced, a bit more into the technical details, we go to the Commission alone. And you see that happening in Brussels already for some 20, 30 years. You see that the local governments are represented there. There's the city of Vienna having its own office, and there's the city of Copenhagen, but there's now the municipalities going in groups. So for the Netherlands, we have the House of the Dutch Provinces, in which there are around 20, 30 professionals from the different local authorities in the Netherlands. And it's interesting because they have been offered a floor in the Dutch permanent representation, which is the embassy to the EU. And then the municipalities and the provinces said, well, thanks, but no thanks. We don't want to be within the national embassy. We just go outside, we have our own building, and we do it alongside the national representation. And that's the kind of negotiation that if you go and work in negotiations, you can be either a diplomat, which is of course the main, you would say, well, it's foreign affairs, it's a diplomat, it's a council, everything, but there's so many people walking around in Brussels that you can also represent a national or a local government. There's so many people walking around in Brussels that you can also represent a local government or province there.
Basically what I hear you say is that if you talk about being a diplomat and being representative at the European Union, it's high over. While if you're going to represent a specific region or even a municipality, you're going to drill down far more into specifics about elements that municipality interests. Now, I can imagine that that's not just the Netherlands that is doing this. You already mentioned that different cities have this going on as well. But one of the interesting things we also discussed recently was that we see more and more organizations. For instance, Microsoft now has an office at the UN in New York. Do we also have these kind of interest groups in the European Union, and do they change the whole dynamics as well?
Yeah, certainly. You can say that Brussels is a mecca for the lobbyists, and that's sometimes also being some kind of accusation. People talking about the EU as a lobbyist Valhalla. And the thing is that actually I always say businesses just look for where the power lies. And what we see now is that the power, for instance, within the European Union lies with the European Parliament. So that's 700 and something members of the European Parliament deciding on European laws. And if you look at one example, for instance, at the moment the European Union is talking about universal chargers for your iPhones and your mobile phones, which is something I think we would all love, to have a universal plug and not all these different plugs everywhere in your house. But the thing is that if you would have a universal charger, obviously the big tech firms like Apple and Microsoft are very interested. So they have their offices in the European Union and they lobby, they go out and have their interest representation to the members of the European Parliament. And the thing is, on the other hand, that there's also the Dutch industry which says, well, we are also supplying to the big tech, we also have some interest there. Let's also go to the European Parliament. Then you have the Dutch government saying, well, we're also interested because we want environmentally friendly chargers, which is, we don't want all this plastic overhaul. So let's also go to the European Parliament. And then you see that these MEPs, members of the European Parliament, who are negotiating all day, but also meeting with interests, which can be either local or national or business interests.
Now, probably, as I know from everybody who follows us, the European Union is highly confusing, especially if you're not living within the Union. You definitely think, like, what is this?
Certainly, yes.
And if we listen to you, we hear how complex it is organized, all these different interest groups, all these different elements. We have the Commission, we have the Council, we have the Council of Ministers, we have the Parliament. It goes all over the place. And there's a lot of news going on saying, well, the European Union, well, maybe it has had its best days, and it's crisis after crisis after crisis before things happen. Is it really that pessimistic with the European Union, or is there a future?
Well, actually, if you study the European Union like I do, and I did it already for a couple of years, and I've been in Bruges, which is actually, I would say, the College of Europe in Bruges is the center for would-be European negotiators and bureaucrats, and you talk about the EU all day, and I can't be something else than positive and optimistic. Because what we see in the European Union, and that's amazing, but you always see that there's always a solution. Although it sometimes comes after we have stopped the clock, what we do literally in agriculture negotiations, when we have to agree on the agricultural budget. You know, the ministers stop the clock that is in the room and they say, okay, we would end at 3, we now stop the clock, and then we put it on again once we've finally reached a compromise. It's very difficult to reach a compromise between 27, as we are now. We were 28, then Brexit, and now we're 27 member states, which is very difficult, but there's always a solution. And the thing is, why is there always a solution? Because in the end, the member states know that cooperating is necessary. Also in the face of big crises like Ukraine, but especially in the field of internal market regulation. So as I mentioned the chargers, that kind of stuff, Europe does that all together, and all the member states cooperate. So there is a big difference between the big geopolitical crisis in which we see that the EU is very often disappointing because it's so difficult to get 27 on one line. And then on the other hand, it's internal market regulation, and the EU is a regulatory champion. We know that we're setting the standards for the rest of the world on quality, on high level of harmonization. We do that. But it's very difficult to have such a kind of a construction between 27 autonomous democratic member states, which is why we have the Commission and the Parliament, which makes it even more difficult. So you see that it works, but it works from the level of the professional going to Brussels every day and saying, listen, I have an interest, and I translate my interest to your interest, and then we talk together, and that's negotiations. Yeah. That's why EU negotiations is such an interesting, fascinating feature to study if you go to the level of the professional.
Yeah, absolutely. One final question. You already touched upon it, but in one of our previous interviews, Bob de Wijk talked about the regulatory power of the EU and how this is actually a new form of superpower. And with that, the European Union has become a superpower comparable to the US, to China, to Russia. Do you agree, or are there also challenges in relation to the regulatory power of the EU?
Yes, I certainly think that the EU is a superpower now, and it has been for the past decades. I think there are severe challenges which are, interestingly enough, in the field of, for instance, climate change, because the EU wants to remain a superpower by preserving a high level of standards of quality, for instance, product quality. And the problem is that now, at the moment, ships and tons of stuff is coming from Asia, is flooding our markets, which is not up to standard. And the question is, do we want to keep our standards high and then say, listen, this is quality, or do we also go under those standards and say, well, environmentally friendly, no, I just want to buy it cheap. And there's a choice there to be made by the European Union, and it's the kind of choice that negotiations are making every day. For instance, now there are negotiations on a carbon border tax for the European Union, and the question is, should we charge certain products coming into the European Union if they're made not environmentally friendly? For instance, if they're made from wasting, polluting industries. And then we put a charge on those products. Well, you could say from the perspective of environmental policy, that's a great idea. But from the perspective of industry policy, we'll say, well, no, but then people will try to get cheaper products and then we'll try to get them illegally. And why would we hamper international trade with such a kind of EU levy? Well, that kind of discussions, that's what you're doing in EU negotiations. It's not that simple. It's not something, well, let's just make it. It's with 27, it's sometimes difficult, but it's also great fun. And why this person from Sliedrecht is always coming back to the European Union is because certain personalities, and I think many of the people liking the Young Diplomat are similarly built, people liking nationalities, different nationalities, culture, languages, laughing about each other's weaknesses and strength and all that. That kind of cartoons, if you like that, then you like the European Union. And that's why EU negotiating is also a lot of fun.
Thank you for answering our questions and for this interview. Let's see each other next time for our next interview, and thank you, Mendeltje, for being with us, and see you next time.